Hi, everyone. We meet again, although not in the circumstances that we originally envisioned when we had our first meeting. I know some of you I'm still getting to know, so this is, I guess, a new way for us to get to know each other. I'm Holly Schroeder. You know me, I was elected chair at our first meeting, and Tara has, with CV Strategies, is going to be our facilitator today. So everybody has audio, video, and we have chat features, which hopefully you have found the chat features, and those are all being recorded in accordance with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N 2920. And so everybody is going to, the members and the staff, everybody is unmuted. If you can self-mute until you're ready to speak to make sure we minimize feedback and background noise, that would be great. And then you can unmute yourselves to comment or respond. And then the chat feature is there for committee members to use, really for meeting management purposes, not to engage in discussion. It is being recorded, but we want to bring discussions out verbally. So, and as I'm going to be watching for people indicating they want to speak, as will Tara, but if you want to say, hey, I have a question, if you don't feel like we're seeing you, or I want to comment, you can say that in the chat feature. It pops up. It's a little bit easier. So we're getting used to this meeting management. So please assist on that. Members of the public are muted and their video is off upon joining the meeting, and they will be unmuted for public comments and questions. I will call for a general public comment on item 2, and then again for each separate agenda items. Comments from the public are limited to 3 minutes. The public has 3 options. They can indicate in the chat feature that at any time during discussion that they want to be called upon. They can write your question or comment in the chat feature, or when public comments are open, Tara will unmute all members and you may verbally state your name and indicate you have a question or comment. Kathy Martin will time the comments and will ring a bell at the 30-second mark and then say thank you, your time is up. At 3 minutes, after which a few moments you will be muted. Public comment can also be sent via email or mail. Please refer to the agenda for specifics. Any public comments received via email or in writing after 2:30 p.m. today will be posted on the website, all of which will become part of the record. So on the, everybody go, that's general public comment. And for the particular agenda items, here's the game plan. I'll introduce each agenda item and the presenter. At the end of each presentation, I will ask the committee for any questions of the presenter. And again, you can indicate, you can raise your hand literally, or indicate that in the chat that you have a comment that you want to be, that you want to make, or a question that you want to raise. If we can't really keep track of it, I may use some alphabetical order things. I'll then call for public comment. And then we as a committee can discuss the item and the public comments. The PowerPoints, were not included in the packet, but they are available on the website, and then that's going to be shown. We're going to do a share screen to show this during the Zoom meeting. So that's sort of our logistics for the day. We will work and figure this all out together. So thanks for your patience as we all work through the technology for this. And Tara, I believe you're going to do a roll call.
Correct. So Dan Masnada.
Yeah.
Kathy Armitage. Let me make sure. This is why we do this. I'm working on it. One sec, Kathy. Try again. Try to unmute. There we go.
I'm here. Did you hear me?
Yep, sure
Okay.
did.
All right, thank you.
Roy Marson, not here. Sandra Cattell. Are you also mute? I also checking one sec. Where is she? There she is. Unmute. Try it now.
I'm here. I don't know why you muted us. If you asked us to mute ourselves.
Accidental. This is first time I'm doing this with this many people on Zoom. so bear with me. Is there Stacey Fortner? Okay.
Present.
Roger Herring.
Here.
Dennis Ostrom.
Here.
Steve Sly.
Here.
Matt Carpenter. All right, Matt. Try it again.
Here.
Great. Eric Adair.
Yes.
Holly Schroeder. Holly, you're muted. I don't know why it's muting people. She was just able to talk. Try it again.
All right, yep, I'm here now. So hopefully we
Okay.
got all of our committee members unmuted so they can self-mute. That was part of, let's hope that we worked through some kinks there. Tara, were you gonna show your screen with the agenda? Or we just able to have
I could. I will open up the agenda.
Since I believe we're gonna use your screen for most of this. Mostly I'm wanting to make sure I'm actually supposed to go on to item 2 now.
Yeah. I have all of my stuff organized. One sec.
A little bit of an exercise in seeing how many screens can I have open at one moment. Keep track of everything, right?
Yep.
Everybody's learning how to do all this. Okay, so I believe we handled everything on introductions there. Not too painful. This time, do we have any requests for general public comments?
Let me unmute everyone. All right. Are there any public comments? Okay. No public comments.
All right, then we get to move on to the approval of the minutes, item 3.1. Any comments or changes?
Dan, I'll move approval.
And if not, I would accept a motion.
I move they be approved. This is Sandra Cattell.
Is there a second?
Eric Adair seconds.
Eric seconded. Anybody, can I do it this way? Can I say anybody who wants to abstain or object, please say so? Then we will assume full ratification. I think I can do it that way because it's harder to make sure we don't miss anybody if we do it the other way around. Okay, so we have 2 technical presentations, and then we have a presentation sort of about the plan and the format for the first workshop. So with that, I believe, so our first technical presentation is going to be presented by Anthony Hickey or Hick from Richard Slade and Associates, and that's on hydrological conceptual model and geologic framework. How about that? Tara, do you want to bring up that,
Yes.
that presentation? And is Anthony?
I'm actually going to stop sharing, and Anthony will now be able to share.
All right, Anthony, are you here on the line? Thank you for introducing yourself.
He's muted.
I unmuted everyone. Why are you doing this to me?
It shows he's on mute.
Yep. There.
All right. I assume you can hear me. It won't let me turn my video on either, but that's, we'll see what happens with the share. But I believe Jeff Barry wanted to do an introduction. You might want to unmute him as well. And I think he wanted to do an introduction before I started.
I actually unmuted everyone. It says all participants are muted, but it's not working.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Just let me make a couple of statements. This is Jeff Barry. I'm the project manager for the GSP consultant team. I just wanted to say that the purpose for today's review of the conceptual model was to provide a common understanding of the geologic framework and groundwater conditions for everyone at the beginning of this project. We're going to build on that as we go further into the work, and we'll have an opportunity to, we'll be referring back to some of this work later on, but we wanted to start with this basic framework. We're relying on a combination of historical reports, new data, updated interpretations of the geology and groundwater conditions. So we're updating everything for the basin. And as Holly mentioned, we're going to be introducing Anthony Hickey with Richard Slade and Associates, and Andrew Francis with Ludorf and Scalmanini. Both have done a lot of work in the basin and will be giving brief presentations. I know that we have sent around the tech memos, and we look forward to hearing your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
All right, with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And let me know when you can see it.
Yes.
All right. So again, I'm Anthony Hickey with Richard Slade and Associates, hydrogeologist. We prepared this tech memo about the geologic framework and principal aquifers in this groundwater basin. There we go. So the overall purpose of our work for this tech memo, we need to document the regional geology, the principal aquifers, hydrogeologic boundaries, and the hydrogeologic properties and conditions within the groundwater basin. So half of this effort was Richard Slade and Associates, and the other half was Ludorf and Scalmanini, Andrew Francis, who will be presenting soon. This is necessary to comply with the GSP regulation 354.14, which is the hydrogeologic conceptual model. So that's the purpose of this tech memo, and that's the everything in it is to define that. Just a quick review of the basin boundaries. The purple line you see on your screen is the Santa Clara River Valley Groundwater Basin East Subbasin as defined by DWR Bulletin 118. This boundary is based on the geology. So we're gonna, I know it's really exciting for everybody. We're gonna talk about a lot about geology over the next 5 minutes. Just to get your bearings, we got the highways on the map here, the Santa Clara River, and it's tough to see at this scale. At each of these figures, we have the tech memo reference figure there. So if you look at the bottom right, it says tech memo figure 1-1. It'll look a little different. I thickened a lot of the lines so you could see it better in this format. But each of the maps that was pulled from the tech memo for this presentation, it's labeled on the screen there. It's important, this shows a number of wells. I just want to make one comment here. Those aren't all of the wells in the basin. Those are all the wells that have data that we used for this project, and that's explained in the text. So what the tech memo covers, this is an outline of the tech memo. Just going to run over it briefly so you know what this tech memo is going to include. We talked about the topography and boundaries of the basin, the regional geology, the soil types within the groundwater basin, key item here, the aquifer systems and the aquifer parameters. Where is the water and how does it move? Subsurface interpretation, as part of this hydrogeologic conceptual model, we need to define what things look like at ground surface, but also in the ground in 3 dimensions. I can't see under the ground, and neither can you. So I'm going to talk about the techniques we use to help define that. And then also key to the groundwater basin in this tech memo is the groundwater recharge and discharge areas. How does the groundwater end up there? Where does it come from? And then how does it get removed or used from the groundwater basin? And I think one of the key points here, and Jeff already hit on it, is that a lot of this work in this tech memo is based on historic work by Richard Sladen Associates and others, their work in the basin and these geologic definitions. But as part of this effort, we updated that information. Since the issuance of those prior reports, new reports have come out by others, new wells have been drilled in the groundwater basin, and some new geologic mapping has become available. So all of that new information is incorporated into this tech memo. So just a very quick touch on geology here. This is the picture you see in the middle. I assume you can see my big green mouse here. This is what we call the stratigraphic column. And it's basically the stack of rocks inside the groundwater basin. Missing from the stratigraphic column is the alluvium, but there's 3 main geologic formations we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the alluvium, which is the relatively young material, the Saugus Formation, and the Pico Formation. So those formations relative to one another are shown in the stratigraphic column, and we'll talk about each of those on the next slide. And again, this is from our tech memo figure 1-5. So when we talk about this groundwater basin, we talk about 2 aquifers, the alluvial aquifer and the Saugus aquifer. What you see on the screen here is the alluvial aquifer, and it's located within the lower parts of the drainage basin along the Santa Clara River and all along the tributaries. So the alluvium is relatively thin. That's why it's not shown on the strat column here. It's up at the top in relative sequence. And it's an important aquifer. It's roughly 100 to 200 feet thick. And there's quite a few wells in the alluvium in this basin. So that's the first aquifer. The second principal aquifer, or the only aquifer, is the Saugus aquifer. And so this is the Saugus Formation that's represented by this green boundary here. The Saugus, this is a little disingenuous in that I've shaded this entire area green, but the alluvium actually overlies this. So it doesn't mean that the Saugus Formation is at ground surface in this entire area. It is obscured by the alluvium and some other younger geologic deposits. But this is the Saugus aquifer, and it's segmented by the 2 main faults that cut through the area, the San Gabriel Fault and the Holzer Fault. And what that faulting does, it causes 3 basic blocks. We call them the blocks of the Saugus aquifer: the north block, the central block, and the south block. Over here on the right, we see the stratigraphic column, and you'll see that the Saugus Formation is very thick in this groundwater basin. Now, it's very thick in the center. It does change as you go north and south toward the limits of the groundwater basin, but we'll show that in a minute, and that's what the cross sections are for. The south block and the central block have producing Saugus wells, and it's a very good groundwater producer. In the north block, there probably are some Saugus wells, but in general, when we talk about the Saugus in the north block, it's what we call a tight formation. It's finer grained. It's actually closer to the bottom of the strat column, where the south block and the central block, we see this entire strat column, or a lot of it. In the north block, we end up only seeing this lower part, and it's not as water bearing. So for all intents and purposes, we assume that a Saugus well in the north block probably isn't going to be a big producer, probably good for domestic purposes. Oh, and I haven't mentioned yet, but I do want to mention each of these figures is overlaid on the geologic map from Tech Memo Figure 1.4. So I changed the colors to make them more apparent on the screen, but that background you see there is the geologic map from our Tech Memo. So I said that the basin boundary was based on geology. And so here's the equation. The boundary of the alluvium plus the boundary of the Saugus Formation is the basin boundary. So you see that this purple boundary surrounds both the Saugus Formation and the alluvial formation. It's not perfect. The DWR boundary, we run into this a lot, especially in geology. We have a lot of GIS methods, and then you try to digitize that into older maps, and the lines always don't line up perfectly. So you'll see some areas where maybe they're not in perfect agreement, and that could be my fat finger on the mouse, or it could be some new geologic mapping. In fact, in this area here, you see that the Saugus Formation is outside of the basin boundary. And so that's one of those areas where new information has been included in this tech memo. We think it's important to include. It's included in the calculations, but technically it's outside of the official DWR basin boundary. So here's our boundary again in purple, and we see everything else in red. And we did that because that's essentially the non-water-bearing sediments. We talked about the Pico Formation down here in the strat column. A lot of it is the Pico Formation, and that's not to say that's all ground surface outcrop. That's just roughly the projected trace of it at depth. But this red area is non-water bearing. It's crystalline rocks. It's the Pico Formation that's marine and very fine grained, and it's other older formations, the Crowder and the Violin Breccia, all these things. With respect to the groundwater basin, we like to lump them because they don't make water. And the groundwater basin is about where does the water come from. So those are all lumped together. So the last few slides, I've talked about the superficial geology, what we see at ground surface, but we also need to talk about what happens at depth in the groundwater basin. What does it look like when we look below? How deep is it, et cetera? So the way geologists illustrate that is through cross sections. Each of these gray lines shown on this figure are cross sections that were created for this tech memo. These cross sections are based on historic cross sections by Richard Slade and Associates and some older reports from '88 and 2001 and updated a little bit later. But what was important for this, we updated these with new information where it was available. So if these cross sections came close to a well that was drilled a little more recently than those reports, we included it. When we laid all this out on the table and looked at our old work, there were spots where we made some adjustments based on new data. So some of the interpretations might differ from the historic work just a little bit, and that was included. So each of these 5 sections shown on this screen are included in the tech memo. And then just real quick, we want to talk about how are the cross sections created. And so there's a number of sources. We look at that superficial geology, and the patterns on the map suggest certain relationships at depth. We look at geologic descriptions from when wells were drilled. Geologists, when wells are drilled, they write down what's coming out of the hole, blue, green, there's a shell, et cetera. We use that information to help figure out what's at depth. And importantly is this geophysical electric logs. So you see these 3 squiggly line sets. Those are actually electric logs that we use for this information. A very simple way to think about an electric log, I like to call it a fingerprint of the well. It's an electronic method. It's a tool that they actually lower into the ground. Measurements are collected, and we use those fingerprints as an indicator of what's happening beneath the surface. So very simply here, I've got these 2 dashed brown lines, and when we lay these e-logs out, we say that looks like a bed that correlates across the basin. So in very general terms, this is the major methodology, not the only methodology, but the major methodology in which these subsurface cross sections and interpretations are made. And these geophysical logs come from oil wells. They come from the big municipal water wells. They come from large ag wells, sometimes the smaller wells, but not so much. When we're talking about domestic wells, we're really relying more on descriptions from a geologist or a driller. And so this is my final slide. These are examples of 2 of those cross sections that are on the previous map. And what happens when we put it all together, these are 2 figures from the tech memo, and there's 3 more of these. What we see is each of these dark lines are an oil well e-log. These smaller red and blue lines are other e-logs from water wells or monitoring wells, et cetera. And so we use all that information and we create what we think is happening under the ground. And so in very simple terms, this groundwater basin looks somewhat like a bowl. It's thicker in the center, it's thinner on the edges, and depending on where you are in the basin, you find the Saugus Formation or the less water-bearing Pico Formation or other formations at different depths. And so these 5 cross sections together help us represent that shape. And because they're at right angles to each other, we can get a general sense of what that basin looks like. So here you see this big sweeping bowl shape in a generally east-west trending cross-section. And this one below here, DD prime, is a generally north-south trending cross-section. And you see that same bowl shape here, segmented by faults, etc. So that's the focus of this tech memo. Again, relied on older data, but we updated it through this process so that we incorporate everything new that we could get our hands on. And there was a lot of work looking at drillers logs and e-logs for this project. With that, if there's any other questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
I have a question. I have some questions. This is Dennis Ostrom.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I would like to start off by understanding what we're going to be using this model for, and what the inputs are to. I know this is the geologic input, but what is going to what is it that we're going to be measuring and then saying, aha, this is what gets us the answer, and I also want to know what the answer is. In other words, so I can try to put some significance on the things that you're saying.
And
so
so
I just, what are the inputs and what are the outputs?
So I'll let Jeff jump in as well, but for this, the hydrogeologic conceptual model, sometimes the word model, this is a conceptual model. So this is the framework. We want to know what the shape of the basin is. And so in very plain terms, this defines the shape of the basin. It will be used for the actual calculation flow models later, but that's not what this process is. And so a little bit of that is in this tech memo. I didn't talk about it in my presentation. I listed it on the table of contents, but we talked about aquifer parameters. So one of those inputs is aquifer parameters, and that means we need to define the rates at which groundwater moves, how porous the aquifer is, et cetera. And so some of those factors that are necessary for the computational model are included in here, derived from historic data and pumping tests. And I know that later tech memos and later work efforts are going to expand on that and include it as part of the modeling.
Yeah.
This is Sandra. Question also.
Hold on.
This is go ahead. Go
Let's
ahead.
Dennis, keep going. Let's get through Dennis's questions. Then I'll go around to the committee. Thank you.
Actually, this is a real difficult format to talk about models and inputs and outputs and then how you actually do the work. But my understanding when I read this is just this is all data for the model. This is like the physical model of the of the aquifers. The things that I want to focus on are and this is his field of understanding, and I have to take everything that he puts in there because he's a lot smarter in this than I am. The things that I'm primarily interested in, it's like a cursory discussion about what the model is, and then how we believe that we can get at the answers that we want, because no one's been down there, and so I know there's a lot of inferences and things like that, but and he alluded to some during the discussion, but are we trying to forecast what the amount of water that's going to be available at certain wells, or what's what we have in storage? Or are we trying to get that information? Are we forecasting, or are we just getting information with this model?
So I think that's a question better for Jeff Berry. Jeff, are you unmuted, or is he having?
Yeah,
trouble?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, great. Okay, great. I think, Dennis, I can answer your question. So this is the very first step in the process of answering the questions that
Is
you have.
identifying, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the geologic framework. This is the basic understanding of where are the principal aquifers and how does groundwater move through them.
Okay.
You're going to see in future meetings and future tech memos, we're going to then begin to translate this physical information into a computer model that will allow us to look at future scenarios as you're describing.
We can talk about the computer model when we get there. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to share that with you. We will get there.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just talking about like it's a steel structure, it's a concrete structure, that type of thing. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good way to think about it. A wireframe.
Sandra, I think you had some questions.
Yes, I do. This is for Anthony. And could you go back to your picture of the overlapping aquifers, the two aquifers together, the Saugus and the alluvial aquifers superimposed?
Yeah, let me get back
I have
there.
a couple questions.
Sure.
That works. Yes.
Oops. Hit it too many times. Sorry about that. 1, 2. Should be right now.
Okay. So I am looking at this, and you know, it looks like a big splat.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk us through some of these areas. For example, I'm looking at the lower or kind of almost middle left. Is that Towsley Canyon? Is that Pico Canyon? Is that East Canyon? What am I looking at those funny little lines that go around what looks like maybe Oak Mountain?
Yeah, I understand. And it's hard to see at this scale. And in fact, it's kind of obscured here because of the way I've colored this. So I would refer you to Tech Memo 1.4. It's much more apparent if you take on the Tech Memo. You can zoom in on that PDF. If we
I was
need to,
just wondering if you could talk us through kind of where the upper reaches of these boundaries are, perhaps.
well, sure. So, I mean, these are all the high elevations here around the basin. This is, far out east, and the main trace of the Santa Clara River, I'm tracing it with my mouse now.
And that must have been Sand Canyon you just passed?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I'm coming up on Bouquet Junction, I believe, here.
Okay, maybe a little further to Bouquet?
Yeah.
Here it is.
Right about there. And then we're coming up, and then we go up toward Castaic here, and then out toward the county line here.
Okay, so before that was San Francisco, and then you had Bouquet.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That gives me a better idea of what this is. Thank you.
Yeah, and I may be able to cycle up here. I'll leave this on the screen in case it helps. I don't know if it's easier to see or not, but.
So where can I get that tech figure that would help me see it better?
It's in your agenda package.
And I can enlarge that, what I have.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Holly,
Yes.
this is Dan. I just want to make a quick comment for the group. We're fortunate here in the valley in that the valley's really been a pincushion of wells over a fairly long history, in part due to the water wells that were drilled, but also all of the oil wells, the exploratory wells, the dry holes, has provided us a lot of data that's allowed Scalmanini and Slade and prior to them, the USGS back in '72 would do a lot of homework and define the aquifers very well and very accurately.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Other questions from the committee?
I have a question. This is Kathy Armtooth.
Kathy.
Can you explain again on figure 1.4 the purpose of the cross sections? I didn't quite get that.
Sure. So we need to create a picture. Let me go back to those cross-section lines. Or you can see them on this figure here. Each of these black lines is one of the cross-section. And so we need to figure out a way to represent on paper what it looks like at depth. And so each of these black lines here is a cross-section. And think of it as a slice of cake. We take a slice out, we cut the earth right down that line, and then we lay it on its side so you can see all the layers on the inside. And so the cross sections are used to represent that on a flat piece of paper. And if you were to cut out those pieces of paper and stand them up and build a little model, you could connect all those lines and start creating the surfaces. And that process is kind of what we were talking earlier. This is the wire frame, the steel and the concrete on understanding what the basin looks like underneath the ground. And then that's put into the computational model, and all those interpretations are made from that.
Kathy needs to be unmuted, Tara. Or Kathy, yeah. Tara, are you there? She's muted too. All right, sorry, bear with us on our tech.
Holly, can I jump in? Can I jump in while they're trying to get her unmuted?
Yeah, Kathy, hold your question. Just don't lose it. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi. Thanks, Kathy. I have a couple of comments and just some corrections, if I can give those now, just so we don't take up time later. But on page 4, it comments about the usage, who's using the alluvial and who's using the Saugus. And it states that Disney, as well as 5 Point, are pulling from the alluvial. We actually specifically do not pull from the alluvial. We pull only from the Saugus Formation. And we've designed our wells in such a manner that we're absolutely sure that's what's occurring. And it's kind of repeated again on page 22. We do draw for agricultural purposes. All our water is drawn for agricultural purposes. And it is drawn from the Saugus Formation, not from the alluvium.
So Anthony, he's obviously referring specifically to the memo, not the presentation here.
Yep, page 4 and page 22. I'll take a look at that. Thank you. And you said, were you saying Disney and 5 Points or just 5 Points?
No. 5 Point and Disney are exact opposites on that. And I wasn't referring to the presentation. I apologize, Holly. I just wanted to get that out in case I have to drop off.
No, that's fine. Any other things, corrections or comments, Steve?
No, I'm good right there. That was all we had.
Okay, have we figured out Kathy's sound yet?
Yes, I can speak. Sorry. No, my only follow-up question on the cross sections were, I'm assuming those cross sections are formed using geological boundaries or formations for the boundaries. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so if you look at the screen, if it's caught up to my arrow clicks yet, you know, each of those wedges of different color are different geologic boundary, essentially, a different formation, not necessarily a different formation, but a different identifiable package of geology.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Eric, Matt, or Stacy, do any of you have any comments or questions?
I do not. Thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
I have just one clarification in my own mind. You say these are different formations, and you're primarily interested in permeability. Is that what you're interested in, or?
Yeah, and basically, yeah, we use the term hydraulic conductivity. So one of the real big items that the model needs is hydraulic conductivity. And that's how fast does water move through that rock or sediment?
Yep. Okay.
You know what? I changed my mind. I do have a question.
Okay.
So in the packet, it has the individual wells with their depth and it looks like some kind of a line chart. Are these wells, is there some place where it's notated which wells are closed? I don't see it. I'm trying to flip through, but I don't see which wells are actually closed and which ones are still.
I think that might be, is it the Richard Slayton Associates memo or is it the Ludorf and Scalmanini memo?
Let me check. I'm about halfway through 3-hole punching it. So give me a second.
Yeah, I'll just say this about the well location. So it's explained in the text of our memo. We didn't include every well location in the basin. As it was mentioned earlier, there are a lot. And so there are other tech memos that we'll talk about active. I think there's a data table created somewhere that talks about active or not active.
Okay.
So Anthony, how in your memo, your wells that you've identified there are to be representative, to basically give us the ability to do the characterization?
Even further than that, they are the wells that had data we could use. So not every well that existed is a data point that is very useful. Some of them, if we're looking at this cross-section, some of them are very shallow and don't give you a lot of deep data. These real long lines are the oil wells, and those are the basis for a lot of the deep correlations. If you look at the water-bearing wells, these reds and blues here at the top, they're not as deep. So we grab the data points that help us define things at depth.
Okay. Roger or Danny, I don't think have asked any questions. Just wanted to do a check-in and then make sure that haven't missed anybody.
I'm fine. I'm fine. I understand. Good presentation, good questions.
All right, with that, Tara, is there anybody, can we check for public comments?
Holly, before we do that, could I make a comment, a suggestion? That when the committee members speak, they identify themselves. Some of us can see who it is that's speaking, but I believe that some of us cannot.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation because people are on multiple screens, especially when you're screen sharing. So it's a good thought. I'll do my best to try to identify and call on people where I can. Tara, can you do a call for public comments? Is everybody unmuted, Tara? Well, you're not unmuted, so it makes me nervous that not everybody is.
Holly, this is BJ Atkins.
Hi, BJ.
I'm just, as a member of the public, I just want to say thank you. It was an excellent presentation. Very well done. Thank you.
All right, so we clearly got some folks, thank you, BJ, got some folks unmuted. Is there anybody else from the public that wanted to speak? And please also remember, you can always put something during the presentations in the chat box that says that, you know, who you are and what you want to speak, and then we'll be certain not to miss you. Because again,
I muted my phone so that I wouldn't speak. Yeah, great. Sorry.
That's okay.
So nobody has texted me. Everyone has, or nobody has chatted me. Everyone seems to be speaking who has wanted to speak. And I actually did figure out the muting issue. There was a setting that was random, but it has been adjusted.
Great. I think there's like 7 ways to mute people. Unmute yourself. So, okay, with that, I'll open it up to any discussion. But before I do that, Tara, is there an action required here from the committee as they start a discussion? Are we looking to just receive this report? Are we approving anything? What is there what's actually the agenda item itself? Sorry, I've got to switch screens.
I'm actually going to let Kathy address that specifically.
Okay,
what we are looking for is the feedback that we received, but if there's an additional specific item. Kathy, did you want to address that part of it?
Sure, and I would invite Rick to unmute. It looks like he did as well. The purpose of this committee is just to give you that first look at this documentation that will be taking public, in particular in light of what it should look like when we present it at the public workshop, and you'll see more about that in item 3.4. So at this point, it's just a high-level overview, and if there's anything that seems unclear of, either through purpose or data, it'd be a time to ask questions.
Yeah, that's right, Kathy. This is Rick. Well said.
I guess my only comment personally would be, and this goes a little bit to the questions that Sandra was asking, and I don't know, how fancy the tech is, but if there is in some of those areas where you're showing the maps and the basins, is to maybe superimpose quickly some of the roads or other landmarks. I mean, I know you don't want that to get in the way, but maybe just, here's a quick overlay that shows you where roads are, just so people can orient, because scale can get confusing. So you do that on the first one, and maybe just make sure you can echo that. Just a thought.
Yeah, we can do that, and maybe label the canyon names as well on that larger map. Something
like that. Just so I think it helps people get their mental map sorted out. Other comments from the committee or other feedback beyond what we've have already had in discussion?
Yeah, it's Eric Adair. I know we're going to get to 3.4 eventually with the workshop format and the material we're going to present. I don't think any of us, unless we already are experts in this area, are going to become expert because we've read now the reports in 3.2 and 3.3. And if we want to defer this discussion until we get to 3.4, my ultimate question is going to be what are we individually going to be expected to be prepared to present at the workshops? I suspect we'll have people show up with very detailed technical questions, and others will have more generic questions. And if we're going to be asked very detailed technical questions, I guess the question I'll ultimately have is, who's going to be there to assist us as we interact with the public and try to answer those kinds of questions?
And so,
I'm actually happy to
Karen,
take
do you want to
that
answer
question.
that now, or do you want to take that to 3.4?
Because it's actually a really quick response. What we're hoping that you'll do at the public workshop is to encourage people to participate in the process, to help them connect with people that have the answers. We don't expect you to obviously become geological experts tomorrow. That would be great if we could, but that's not an expectation. What we're hoping is that you'll record the question, you'll hand that along to me so I can record that in my report, and then add it as an FAQ if needed, or address the question directly to the person if they have a very specific question. So it allows us to engage and educate as we can and as people have questions. So it's more about more hands to help make sure that we get all of the questions, so that nobody goes, oh, I wasn't able to reach anyone, I'm gonna walk away. And it's always acceptable to say, that's a great question, I don't have an answer, but I can put you in contact with somebody who does and who will get back to you. And then just make sure that you give them my information, and I will locate whoever on our team has the most accurate information, and we'll get that to that individual.
Terrific, thank you.
Okay, not hearing any other comments, and certainly I think Eric's point of, this is all leading towards 3.4.
Stacy has a question.
Oh, 3.4 is where I have my question. So
okay, so
I'll hold
hang tight on those questions, and keep that ultimate point that Eric just made in mind. Let's do a run through of 3.3. Andrew Francis, I believe, is going to do a presentation on more hydrological modeling. I won't go into all of the detail there.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Andrew Francis. Let me start my screen share here. and I'm a hydrogeologist with Ludorf and Scaminini Consulting Engineers, and I'm presenting the groundwater conditions portion of the hydrogeologic conceptual model. And a way to think about this as it's the input to the framework that Tony has set up for everybody. It's how does the groundwater respond to the conditions that, or the framework that he has already set up. So the groundwater conditions TM consists of 5 major sections, and the purpose of these are to address the regulatory requirements of SGMA for the HCM and groundwater conditions section. And those sections include groundwater elevation, change in groundwater storage, subsidence, the primary uses of each aquifer, which are the alluvial aquifer and the Saugus Formation, and the groundwater quality of each of those aquifers as well. So to start off, our report covers groundwater elevations across the basin within each of the principal aquifers. And the purpose of this is to understand how do groundwater conditions vary between seasonal high and seasonal low conditions. What do you see when water levels are at their highest? How is groundwater flowing and in what direction? And under seasonal low conditions, do we see any variation between that? So we present that for 2018, which is described under the GSP regulations as current conditions. And the reason we use 2018 is that the time we started to develop this, it was the most complete and recent data set. So it's not necessarily serving as the representative normal conditions, but it's the most current conditions data was available for. And also in this section, we're going to discuss long-term trends. And we represent that by showing hydrographs, which are the groundwater elevations for a given well over a long period of time. And this represents the historical highs, the historical lows, and how things have changed given climatic conditions or groundwater extraction. So first off here, I have the contours of the alluvial aquifer under seasonal high conditions. And these contours, they represent lines of equal elevation. And as you can see my mouse here, these numbers represent the elevation of groundwater in terms of feet above sea level. So with these numbers, the groundwater elevations are at their highest, and the eastern portion of the basins at the highest elevation, and in the lowest as you move to the west along the Santa Clara River around 900 feet in the far western part of the basin. So generally speaking, the groundwater flow in this area is from east to west. Here we have the seasonal low conditions, which are actually very similar to what we see in the seasonal high, only a slight shift in where you see the contours. The general flow is the same. You see the flow from east to west, highest in the east, lowest in the west, with small variations across the basin. And you can see I have these contours confined to where we have the alluvial aquifer defined. We don't have these extending into the Saugus. Part of the SGMA regulations are to identify what is the horizontal gradient, or how does the groundwater elevation change with distance. And under the seasonal low and seasonal high conditions, they're very similar. But under a given set of data, or under a given time period, for say the seasonal low conditions, you see a large variation in the horizontal hydraulic gradient in the eastern part of the basin as compared to the west. In the east, in the higher elevations, you see a change as much as 95 feet per mile. Every mile, you're seeing a decline in groundwater elevation of 95 feet as you move east to west. And in the lower elevations along the Santa Clara River here, you see a much gradual gradient where the change is roughly 29 feet for every mile. Next, we have the contours for the Saugus Formation. Here we don't have the same coverage of data as we did for the alluvial aquifer, where we almost have data covering the entire aquifer. It's primarily confined to the central, southern, and western parts of the basin. But what we see here is that under seasonal high conditions, we generally, similar to the alluvial aquifer, have an east to west flow, with the highest elevations in the east and to the south here flowing towards the center of the basin and to the west. There is some evidence with the data we have available that there is some slight flow from west to east, but there's a limited amount of data that we have available to us, and don't understand it quite as well as the alluvial aquifer. But under seasonal high and seasonal low conditions, we roughly have the same gradient, a slightly higher gradient under the seasonal high conditions of 42 feet per mile, as compared to the seasonal low conditions, which is roughly 35, which are very similar. You don't see drastic differences in the vertical gradient or in the horizontal gradient as you do with the alluvial formation. And next year I have the seasonal low contours for the Saugus formation. So a bit more on the methodology we use to create these contour maps that represent both the seasonal high and seasonal low conditions. I have a graph here that shows the precipitation amounts for 2018. And we see that seasonal high contours correspond with a period of the year that we have the greatest precipitation, which is typically in the late winter to early spring. And under these conditions, it's January through April, where we see the greatest amount of precipitation. And that also corresponds to the highest water levels. The seasonal low conditions occur after extended dry periods over the summer, where you're likely to have some increased pumping, and you're going to have a decline in your water level elevation. So with all the wells that we have in the basin, we take all the known water levels at a given point, interpolate between those to create these contours, or they're the lines of equal elevation. And with these, we can use to determine the gradients we discussed in the general direction of flow. So moving on to the hydrographs, unlike the contours, which are a snapshot of how groundwater is flowing across the basin at one given time, these show you how groundwater elevation is changing over time. And I want to point out here that on the left side of my screen, this is the eastern part of the basin, where we see that higher gradient in the higher elevation, higher groundwater elevations. And then over here, these wells are primarily in the western part of the basin, where you see those lower elevations along the Santa Clara River. The important thing to point out here is that, especially in the east, we see a cycle of approximately 5 to 10 years where you have gradual declines over extended dry periods and then rapid increases in groundwater elevation. You see that both in the Mint Canyon area and the Bouquet area, where these red bar here represent the periods of time where you have. And over these times, you see a gradual decline. But as soon as you have some wet conditions, there's a rapid spike as much as 50 feet, 70 feet sometimes. So overall, especially in the eastern part of the basin, there hasn't historically been chronic decline. We see cycles. We're currently at a low point, but under wet conditions, groundwater elevations are likely to recover as they have in the past. On the right side of our screen, the wells representing the western part of the basin, you see a more muted response to the climatic conditions, especially down here in the Castaic Valley in the lower elevations along the Santa Clara River. You see almost no response at times to dry conditions, similar to the cycles you see in the eastern part of the basin. So groundwater conditions vary across the basin over time, given the different climatic conditions. And next, we have the hydrographs for the Saugus formation. We don't have as much data here as discussed in the contour discussion. But again, we see a cycle. These are longer cycles, longer periods than what we saw in the alluvial, 5 to 10 years, but maybe 20, 25 years, where you see these periods of increasing water levels and declining water levels. Again, I would say the takeaway here is that we're currently lower, not near historic lows, but in a cycle of declining and increasing water levels. Another important thing to point out here is that, unlike the alluvium, the Saugus, you see a lot of variation. You see more variation in a given year than what you'd see in the alluvium. Okay. The next section our TM covers is the change in groundwater storage. And there are two ways we can go about calculating change in storage, and these approaches are taken by different basins across the state. You can either use seasonal high contours as I've presented today, and you could look at that from year to year and then see what the difference is across the basin using that as storage parameter, which would be taken from Tony's geologic framework. And we can identify what the change in storage is. For this GSP, we have elected to take a different approach where we calculate the storage from year to year utilizing the groundwater flow model, which is going to be based on the information that has been presented here today. And so with that, the TM did not present any numbers yet on what the change in storage is from year to year, but will be done in future tech memos and will be included in the GSP utilizing the groundwater flow model, utilizing a water budget approach where we look at all the inputs, all the outputs, and see what the difference from year to year is in the total groundwater in the basin. Examples, precipitation, losing streams, groundwater inflows, and artificial recharge are examples of what contribute, and then outflows such as groundwater extraction, gaining streams, groundwater that's contributing to surface water flow, and then also groundwater outflows.
Could you explain losing streams and gaining streams?
Yeah, a losing stream, yes, would be where you have surface water flowing and that surface water is actually recharging the aquifer. So the water is leaving the stream and entering the groundwater system, where under a gaining stream, you'd have groundwater contributing to the surface water system. Okay. The next section that our team covers is subsidence. And subsidence is the gradual lowering of land surface elevation due to the withdrawal of fluids. Most typically associated with groundwater withdrawal or oil withdrawal. This is a very common problem in the Central Valley, primarily due to groundwater withdrawal, where there's been subsidence, land surface elevation change of tens of feet. But here I present two continuous GPS stations that are located within the East Basin that collect elevation data every day. And we've looked at that going back to the early 2000s. And with that, we see no indication of long-term subsidence. These data points here show where elevation is at a given year, and you see increases, decreases of less than 1/10 of a foot. So it's very minimal, and you're not seeing any long-term decline. We also cover the primary uses of groundwater, and this is a generalized discussion with the data we have available to us. There's groundwater use that we may not be aware of, but with the data that we have, we looked at what the average extraction was for the total basin. And then in the TM, we also break out what that looks like from aquifer to aquifer, what it is in the Saugus and what it is in the alluvium. But here I just have the average numbers for each of the use and what the primary use is and where you have the least amount of use for the categories we present here. And then for an example, I show going back to 1980, the total groundwater extraction for both the Saugus Formation and alluvial aquifer, where most of your groundwater production is coming from the alluvium.
Hey, Andrew?
Yes.
This is Dan Malsnott. I just want to make a point. 1980 is relevant in one sense. That is the first year that we started taking imported water into the valley from the State Water Project. Up until that point in time, our sole source of water supply was groundwater here locally.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and so the last section that we cover in RTM is groundwater quality. And there are two components of this section where we focus on the general groundwater quality and look at constituents that have been studied in previous reports. And like Tony said, we take the information from previous reports, but also update that with current information. But the focus of the general groundwater quality are constituents such as TDS, chloride, nitrate, and sulfate. And each of these constituents have water quality objectives that have been set by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And we look at these historic concentrations compared to the water quality objective. The TM also addresses constituents of concern or contaminants, and those include perchlorate, volatile organic compounds, and PFAS. And the purpose of SIGMA and the GSP regulations is to identify these, but not necessarily inform any decisions on how these be addressed. There are many programs currently that look at these and are monitoring for these specific contaminants or constituents of concern. And I didn't have a generalized figure that quickly summed up what groundwater quality looked like across the entire basin. So I present the TDS for both aquifers for the different parts of the basin. And on this page, it shows the eastern part of the basin and what the TDS concentrations have done over time compared to the water quality objective, where you see a variety of trends to stable to slightly decreasing or increasing in areas. Past studies.
Could you say what TDS is?
I'm sorry, TDS is total dissolved solids, which is basically salts, your anions and the different constituents that, you know, generally make up groundwater. So this is a general indicator of groundwater quality, and this is this is what we see in the eastern part of the basin. So moving to the west in the alluvial aquifer, you see kind of a variety of trends where, like I said, generally stable to slightly decreasing or even increasing in certain areas. And lastly, I have the Saugus Formation groundwater quality, which no consistent or evident trends we see. Like I said, stable to slightly increasing or even decreasing in areas. So with that, that concludes our presentation. So any questions?
Yes, I have a couple questions. This is Sandra Cattell.
Go ahead, Sandra.
When you talk about, in the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about the elevations in both the alluvial and the Saugus aquifers. I noticed, especially with the alluvial, you had so many elevations and along the river, but you have very few in the south. And it's very important to me because I think that's going to have something to do with your gaining stream, losing stream concept, because obviously the drop in elevation increases the water flow, which then increases increases or decreases the amount of water that's going to be able to be absorbed into the ground. So I would hope that you would have more in the way of elevations. I think it was the, not the season high, it was the one below.
The season low.
And the season low. Yeah, that one seemed to have a lot more information to the north versus with the season high, you had a little bit more, but not very much. And I think that that's a very important component to keep in these maps.
Correct.
Also, when you talk about outflows, I really think that you should be including some of the outflows, not just the users of the water, but abusers of the water, like invasive weeds like tamarisk and arundo, that actually suck up the water, because those create a loss of water the same as if I was pumping in a well.
Right. Yeah, and that's an important part of the conceptual model. It's a little harder to estimate than some of these numbers we have, which are actual pumping numbers. That in the overall plan, the uptake of plants, I imagine, will be included. I can't speak to that for sure without discussing with the rest of the team, but
Andrew, this is Tony. Tony Hickey at Richards, Anthony Hickey at Richard Slayton Associates. Yeah, that is the water-loving plants, phreatophytes, are listed as one of the discharge sources in our tech memo, and I know that there are some references from the past that are going to be included as part of the modeling.
Thank you.
I have
Andrew,
a question.
Andrew, this is Steve Cole. Can you, I don't think, Sandra's first question on, she was interpreting the less amount of lines as less data. Can you explain again why the lines get further apart as they get more towards the centralized portion of the basin?
Oh,
Yeah.
Steve, it wasn't whether they were further apart. It was that in the very south, I do not see as much discrimination in elevation as I do in the north.
So Sandra, these are developed with the data I have available, or the data that's available to us. So in the seasonal high conditions in 2018, we had some data points down here that allowed us to interpolate between other points in the southern part of the basin, where we knew for sure what the groundwater levels were doing. And then under the seasonal low conditions, we didn't have that same point up here. There was no groundwater elevation measured, so we can't speculate. I mean, we could draw some inferred lines, but the one point we did have down here fell between these two contours. So with the data that was available to us, it was between 1060 and 1100. So in the text, that can be explained or expanded on, that we're not suggesting that there's less water here or there is no water here, but just that with the data we have, it falls between these two contours.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Roger.
Roger has a question, I think. Roger, go ahead.
Andrew, I live in Bouquet Canyon. We're supposed to receive about 2,100 acre feet a year released from Bouquet Reservoir. Does that contribute significantly to the groundwater basin, or is that an insignificant amount or a significant amount as far as the whole, in the scheme of the whole thing?
I know it's something that has been looked at. I personally, I can't speak to it in too much detail, but it's something that hasn't been analyzed. I know there is less releases from Bouquet Canyon dating back to 2005, but that would be something that would require more analysis and further investigation.
Andrew, I think I can answer that. This is Jeff Berry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, we've been working on a water budget for the entire basin that includes Bouquet Canyon and releases from each of these tribs. And so we will be accounting for that in the water budget analysis that we're going to do. So stay tuned.
Well, no, I understand you're accounting for it in the analysis. My question is it a significant contribution to the whole groundwater stuff that you can pump out, or insignificant, or somewhere in between?
It's not a significant contributor compared to all the other inflows and outflows.
Okay, thank you.
But we'll quantify that for you.
Okay, thank you.
This is Jerry Gladback. I'd like to follow up on that.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, when you say you're going to take it into account, what are you going to take into account? What LA Water and Power is required to release, or what they are releasing? And the second comment, isn't it supposed to be 5 cubic feet per second release, Roger?
It's 5 cubic feet per second for 6 months of the year and 1 cubic feet per second for 6 months of the year. I think October to April is 1, and April or May to September is 5.
Okay, that's an average of 6 acre feet per day. So 6 times 365 is what?
They're supposed to release about 2,100 acre feet. I'm not sure how the math works out, but they're supposed to release 2,100 acre feet per year total.
Yeah. So it's not totally insignificant, especially in Boca.
Well, yeah, I guess to respond to that, we're going to do our best to take into account actual releases and actual data sets, not what they're supposed to.
Okay. That's fine. You've answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, I have another question. This is Dennis Ostrom. Is this a typical approach for a basin? I mean, has this been done before, or? Did you hear me?
Dennis, are you
Yeah,
referring
when you say
to the outline of the groundwater conditions TM?
I mean, does like Santa Barbara have one? Does LA have one? Salt Lake City?
Well, okay, I'll field that one, Dennis. We're responding to the state of California's requirements here, and for all medium and high priority basins in the state are required to develop these groundwater sustainability plans, and each plan is supposed to cover these topics. And there's roughly, what, 125 of these basins in the state. And so each basin will have one or more plans. Some of them have multiple plans. They cover these topics.
Okay, so it was prompted by it, but it wasn't, an effort like this wasn't requested for each basin, was it?
Yes, it is required.
Oh, okay,
in fact,
an effort like this?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So
that you keep calling it a model. Is it? It seems like it's more of a more detailed monitoring array, and then you're going to learn from it how it responds, and then you'll be able to use it to kind of a dynamic forecasting as we go through a season. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
yeah, exactly. So we start with, in our brain, you know, a description of what are the controls on groundwater, and then we then translate that to a computer model that allows us to do simulations.
All right, so you can get the kind of the effect over at point A as to what you did at point B after you've gone through a few seasons. So it's and it gets better as you go. The accuracy. Okay.
That's the idea. So we look at ranges in climatic conditions that have occurred in the past and that could occur in the future. We look at changes in pumping that have actually occurred and that could occur in the future, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Holly, may I add a little bit to that response? This is Tom Bunn.
Yeah, quickly.
Yeah. The regulations specify in pretty good detail what the outline of the groundwater sustainability plan will be. And it has these sections called hydrologic conceptual model, groundwater conditions, and so forth. And these technical memos will ultimately be chapters in this plan. And to answer your questions, the outline of the plan is the same for every groundwater sustainability plan in the state. And another one, I know the word model is kind of hanging you up. That did not come from these consultants. The hydrogeologic conceptual model is the name of one of the chapters in the DWR regulations. So, and it's used a little bit differently, I think, from what you think of as a model. And as both Jeff and Anthony pointed out, they're using the word model to just show this is what we think the basin looks like. This is our model in our head of what exists under the ground.
Yeah, and then we're going to come up and be able to understand with varying conditions how it will affect the parameters that we're interested in.
Yes, because after these two, the next chapter is going to be water budget.
Yeah.
And then later your task will change a little bit because instead of just describing the basin, we'll start making decisions, planning the basin.
Yeah.
But that's later on.
in some ways, if would this be a correct way of saying is that we have the models that are sort of explanatory, what we think is happening, which are different than perhaps predictive models about what we think will happen under certain situations.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Are there other questions from the committee?
This is Matt Carpenter.
Yeah, Matt.
So I have a follow-up question to Dennis's about the discharge into Bouquet Creek from Bouquet Reservoir that's operated by Water and Power. Under the current conditions, if you were looking at 2018, that's a little bit of an artificial condition that they're not releasing the water that they historically have, and that they're, I think, required to, once they're able to safely, because that's water that falls within the watershed that's supposed to be, that they intercept by way of that reservoir, and they're supposed to release. So when Jeff says it's going to be accounted for, I think it's not insignificant to set it aside. I think it probably should be closely looked at. That's just a comment. I guess it's not a question. It's a follow-up comment to Dennis's question.
I'd agree, Matt. This is Jerry.
And Roger says, amen.
Other questions from the committee? And I am cognizant of time here, so.
This is Kathy Armitage. I have a question.
Yep.
Can you help me understand why the water budget method was chosen over the successive seasonal high periods to determine groundwater storage?
Yes, so other basins have run into this issue, and part of doing the water budget method is that it's going to align with the other groundwater components we're going to report. So when we report groundwater pumping, that's going to be reported on a water year basis, which is from October to September for a given year. And then when we look at that storage change, it's going to be from September to September, and that's going to correlate or line up with when we're looking at how much groundwater was pumped over that same period. Whereas if we took a different approach where we looked at the seasonal high contours, that represents a spring to spring comparison when we're going to report groundwater pumping on a fall to fall basis. So it just, things don't line up, and it doesn't always capture what groundwater levels are doing as compared to how much you pumped in the previous year.
Thank you.
Other questions? Tara, do we have any public comment on this item?
This is Jerry. I have a question.
Okay, Jerry.
If you go back to the Saugus dry, with the contours, I know you don't have a lot of data on this, but it looks like with the contours, it looks like the Saugus flows out north of Valverde. Is that really true? I was surprised. I thought it would have flowed toward down 126, following the river.
So yeah, this is, if I understand your question correctly, we have to point out here, and it's flowing slightly to the southeast here because we have a higher 1040 contour.
Oh, okay. I couldn't read the numbers. Sorry about that.
So yeah, it is flowing away from Valverde.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Tara, is there any public comment on this item? I'm looking for Tara Tara, we're not hearing you. You're muted again.
Yep, I'm muted again. Is there any additional public comment? I see none at this time. Nobody has been muted by my hand except for myself. Is there anything else? Nope. Nope.
If there's no other comments, then I'd like to go on to 3.4, which really is important. So I'm going to let Tara, you're going to show your screen. So we can talk really about how this gets presented at the workshop and how we're going to do a workshop in our Brave New World.
So before I share my screen, I want to just kind of speak a little bit about intent. So hi, everyone. The intent behind the public workshops is to provide opportunities for public input throughout this process. So it's, we've just started writing the actual plan. So as you can see, this is the very first, we're just starting the framework of how this really comes together. And so we're getting feedback along the way, every step of the way. Today we'll be talking specifically about the hydrologic concept model as a public workshop. And then obviously there'll be the additional public workshops that we've discussed before, including groundwater surface water interactions, water budget preliminary, sustainability, sustainable management criteria, project management actions, presentation, and then we'll do the presentation of the final draft of the groundwater sustainability plan, which will have been informed by all of these different pieces. The process dictates that these are the areas, as Tom already mentioned, and we'll be following state guidelines. So we've started with the actual plan components, which I hope you've had some time to review, and you've provided us some great feedback, which we'll be incorporating. And now we're discussing the proposed workshop content. So before we and what we're really seeking here today is feedback on whether or not the content makes sense, if it's easy to understand, if you have any questions or things that we could expand upon for this particular phase. And we'll also be discussing the proposed presentation, which will be informed by the presentations you've just seen. Jeff, do you have any additional information on how or what people will be seeing, if it's how different it will be from the presentations they've just seen on the technical memos?
What they're going to see is really some expanded information that's presented in the tech memos. We learned a lot from the feedback here on things that we can do to improve, including better maps that can orient folks to where they are in the basin, which would be a big help, and some other things that are toning down some of the technical terms that we're using that come easy for us, but are not easily understood by others who aren't in this field. So we'll be focusing on those kinds of things, but for the most part, the technical content is similar to what you heard.
So as you get ready here, if I might take just a frame of reference here for as we go through this. Tara's going to present sort of the framework by which this will be presented. I think we should, to the extent possible, have our comments be, we don't think that is presenting this clearly. These are the questions that come up. And this is not necessarily where we're going to answer all those questions beyond what we did in the technical memos. But you could say, hey, I don't think that communicates what we heard in the technical memo, work on that, as opposed to let's go back and revisit the technical stuff. Now, that's obviously a blurry line, so we'll do our best at that, but again, this is us trying to make sure that what does get presented in the workshops, which we then still also have the opportunity to, to comment on and provide input on as it moves forward. I don't want to necessarily I don't want to go off on a technical tangent when we're trying to talk about how effective the communication and presentation is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a comment on that, and a question and then a comment, if you don't mind. I guess I'm uncomfortable with the format. I don't like the stations. And the more that I think about it, the more that I am uncomfortable with it. And I just really want to revisit that, and maybe it's not this meeting. I don't know how to do that. I don't know if that was solidified in the technical aspect of this board, but I'm really uncomfortable with the format. I really don't like it. And I just sat through 2 days of VMware Empower, which is a professional the training convention. Usually it's in person, but we've had to take it online. And they tried to do this station thing, and it just more solidifies the fact that the people are not going to get all the information. And if the goal of this is transparency, then I don't think having stations and workshops is going to deliver the outcome of reaching as many people as we can and getting the word out and having the transparency in the education, the public education that we're looking for. And so that's where I'm at with this. I'm just really uncomfortable with the format. I don't like it at all.
You know, I agree with Stacy with one slight twist. Workshops are good, but the stations are not. If you could come up with a good way to present multiple workshops on this information, I think it would be far better. I also have a question about the content. I did put it into the chat where you talked about surface water and also the alluvial aquifer under discharges and under recharge for the aquifer. You've left off the Soledad Canyon perchlorate treatment facility, and it actually creates a riparian area for, I guess, about a half a mile. And it affects both surface water because of the plants and also then just gets sucked into the ground. So it's obviously recharging the aquifer. And that's a good amount of water that's going in there. So I would like to see that at least mentioned under both, where you talk about the water reclamation plant discharges and also infiltration of reclaimed water of the reclamation plants. So I think that's just a small addition to both of those.
So I'm going to take the second half there, at least for the moment, and let the tech folks make note of that and for their assessment, at least for the moment. And then Tara, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to Stacy's and Sandra's comments and concerns about the station format and again, how we make all of this work. You know,
so one thing I just want to remind people is that the primary presentations are not in a workstation format at all, not even a little bit. And there's a Q&A section afterwards where people can ask their questions. There's no, like, we only go into workstations after the fact, and it's for people who want to continue to educate themselves if they have that desire to do so with information that is on the website at any point in time. And in fact, we're going to be going through that right now, so you'd be able to see it ahead of time. It is not there is no, yes.
So Terry, is what you're going to present to us right now what happens in that sort of broader context, that broader format before stations?
We've actually done that. The presentations that you've seen are will be part of the larger scale. That's what Jeff was
once we just saw.
To. Right.
Okay.
So that's what will be presented to everyone. All of that detail, everything in a format just like this, where it's it's virtual because it has to be, but where everyone's all in one room, there's nobody separated out. And then the workstations are just, if you want more information about geological formation, which has already been presented in one format, it provides you with an additional option, should you choose to do so, to talk with a specialist one-on-one, where you have some opportunity to really engage in a conversation that you might not be able to do in a Q&A session. So and those are recorded, and then we'll be taking any FAQs. Those are recorded for my report, and will be presented to the board, to this committee. And then in addition to any FAQs that we find, like if people are asking the same question or if there's a great question that somebody asked, we'll be taking that information and putting it online in an FAQ section. So nothing is kept.
Yeah. Will the agenda sort of reflect kind of that two-part component? Yeah. So if somebody wants to be in more of a general session, they can know they can stop or whatever, but then they want to go deeper, they stick around for more, and that there's kind of different levels of detail.
Exactly. And it's not even really that there's different levels of detail. It's more like if you want to access the handout and you can actually create your own interaction with it. So if you want to go to the handout and download it ahead of time, you can. If you want to watch the video ahead of time, you can. It's more an ability to be able to chat with somebody afterwards. If you want a chat option, either and in person, it would have been in person. This happens to be a digital solution to that, but it's just an opportunity to speak more in depth, because some people don't want to have a whole conversation with somebody while they're at a podium. So it allows for more interaction and not less. And that's what's confusing to me about the not wanting to have that option. It's not that we're not having Q&A, and it's not that we are not having a joint presentation that is very thorough and in-depth. And it's not even that we're doing
Holly,
more.
this is Steve Cole. Just one thing for consideration for the committee. And I said this back before when we heard, concerns about the format. We've got a bunch of these workshops coming. We've got a suggested format here. I think that it provides an opportunity for the full public to engage in multiple ways, whether they're comfortable doing it as a group, whether they want to go in and talk to an expert on their own, and let's see how it goes. And if it bombs, let's change it. So I just want to take a little bit of the pressure off. So I
think it's a fair point, Steve, especially since we are, at least for the beginning of this, starting in a virtual world. And just as we spent, a few minutes at the beginning clumsying around, getting used to it, I think adaptation is going to be imperative, as it has been for the past 2 months. Stacy, just a quick reaction on it, especially when you think about this adaptation process.
Yeah, so my concern is that it's just siloed. And so if you are trying to provide big picture and the most information shared with the most amount of people, if someone, usually in a big group, if someone hears a question, they'll say, oh, I didn't think about that. That's a good question. And then that might bring up something else that interests them. If you take a siloed approach, you kind of lose out on that collaboration piece of it. And I just want this to be a little bit more collaborative. And I don't feel like we're going to get that in the workshop format that we're using now. And I don't remember hearing any other formats. I remember this format as being, this is what we're doing. I don't remember having an option to select from another format. So Steve, if I missed something, I apologize, but I don't remember hearing any other options.
Kathy has something.
I can expand on that. We actually did hear the input from Sandra and you, and have created more of this hybrid process. And so if we look at that meeting chronologically, everybody will come into the virtual meeting room, and Anthony will do his full presentation, a much more expanded version of what we did today. And then we will open up to Q&A to everybody in the room. Everybody will hear everybody's questions, see the answers, they can use chat until that process is expended. And then we will bring in Andrew, and he will do his whole tech memo, and everybody in the room will hear it, and everybody will answer questions. And then after that, what Tara will be showing you next, there are these 4 breakout rooms that take some of those topics down and provide some really graphical ways to see them, some video explanations, and just really bring it down to a simple visual level. And they can go into those afterwards. They say, oh, I really want to know more about that thing. I'm going to go to that breakout room. And there'll be somebody there that's moderating that room, and they can talk with them. But that's not until after full-on presentations and Q&A as a group. We won't shut
So
that
it
down.
sounds like you've tried to embellish the front part more than what we heard at our in-person meeting. I guess what I'd like to ask, for the sake of kind of keeping things moving forward, is we try it. I think we could, Tara, I think, and Kathy, maybe we can give some attention to how we effectively use the chat function so that people can maybe be asking questions or making comments along the way, not all of them which have to be like one-off responded to, you know, but it's a way of us collecting information, which might be an even more inclusive way for people to participate, simply because this virtual world can be a little stilted. And so I think we got to make sure that that is not exclusively for admin like it probably is here, because we've got a more confined group here, but then we try to do that. Sandra.
Okay, so I personally am willing to give it a go and see how it comes out. I do feel if somebody says I'm interested in this and that they may not have the opportunity to go to more than one breakout. But the other thing is in the chat goes to Tara. Chat should go to everyone so people could see the questions. And that would—
a personal setting, people can choose, yes.
No, you cannot.
No, all the chats here go only to Tara privately.
Yeah.
We can
Right now they do, only because I wanted to not potentially have a Brown Act issue where we have committee members chatting back and forth privately. So it's all
we can
just
fix that for the workshop.
Yeah, exactly.
For the workshop.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
With that in mind, and Steve's comments and everybody else's comments, I'm willing to give it a go, with the understanding that we come back and do an analysis and see how it comes out. I do appreciate the fact that you've expanded the front part. Again, I am a little concerned, but I'm willing to give it a chance because we have to move forward.
Yeah, so let's look for two things, Tara and Kathy. One is a way for people to say, I would want to go to two groups, and maybe you can't do that simultaneously when we go off, versus if you were physically in a room, you could eye that somebody's open. So we got to figure out how to manage that. The second is after the meeting, let's try to do like if we can do this email, and I'll let you figure it out. You don't have to answer it right now. But how do we solicit feedback from the committee on, did that work? What could we improve? What could we, you know, et cetera? What did we learn? So that when we do the next one, we take and we keep improving, at least as long as we're in this virtual world.
Holly, could I suggest that we kind of do like a postmortem after we do this first workshop?
Well, I was hoping we could start with a little bit of a solicitation postmortem via email or whatever, rather than having to try to have a whole meeting about it.
Okay. We actually have the meeting already scheduled.
What's that?
To have a postmortem. So after every public workshop, there is a postmortem scheduled. That includes the feedback that it's a report to you of the feedback from the public, and also a postmortem of the public workshop. So we actually have that already built into this whole system.
Okay, so let's try to get to that system. Since it is Friday, let's have Tara run through her basic presentation here. And then the second agenda item after this is some of the timetable thing, which hopefully will be pretty straightforward. So Tara, let's go to your show screen and see what we got here. And again,
all right,
feedback is focused on, are we getting the right stuff out there, and comments about how we might get it out there better. We're not answering those questions or solving them today.
And just a reminder that you've all received the scripts of every video. I don't have all 4 videos completed today because I wanted to make sure that we have approval on the scripts. I have one example of a video so that you can see what that would look like. I'll be accepting all the changes and thoughts on every script and every video, and you also have all the handouts. There's not much more to the individual pages than those items, but I'm going to go through what the interaction is, and then you can kind of see how it all comes together. So somebody would come here after the meeting. As you can see, it's not a super elaborate get you away from everything. And there's a video, which I will, oh, I have to stop sharing and reshare with sound.
Maybe just do a couple minutes of the, or a minute of the video, not.
It's only a minute and a half.
Only a minute and a half, awesome.
Before a groundwater sustainability plan can be created, we need to understand how this precious water source works in the Santa Clarita Valley. Geology plays an important role in the availability of groundwater. Materials such as sand, gravel, and some sedimentary rocks are porous and permeable, allowing them to hold and transmit water underground in what is known as an aquifer. Santa Clarita Valley is served by two aquifers. The alluvial aquifer system, made up of clay, silt, sand, and gravel, is replenished mainly by rainfall, surface water runoff, and discharges of treated wastewater from the Saugus and Valencia water reclamation plants. The alluvial aquifer supplies environmental, residential, municipal, industrial, and agricultural uses in the Santa Clarita Valley. The Saugus Formation is the other major source of groundwater in the region. This system generally contains mixed layers of clay, silt, sand, and gravel. The layered structure forms a bowl in the groundwater basin that is tilted to the west. Both the alluvial and Saugus aquifers provide reliable water flows, and each has several municipal supply wells and irrigation wells located within them. For more information about how you can help us manage this valuable resource for future generations, please visit scvgsa.org/outreach.
Back to you, Tara.
I muted myself because I was getting feedback, but back to the website here. So then what they could do is provide feedback. We've done questions and then a lot of open-ended pieces where they can provide specific feedback on geology or any additional feedback on anything that they want to provide. So there's no, it's a really quick and easy way to garner that feedback in a digital environment where somebody just wants to type in what they're feeling. Obviously, we also have the chat function, which is also recorded and is recorded today and also has that chat availability. And you see, we encourage you to ask me questions. And then I go, chat, I want to chat to somebody. Let's start it. So.
New visitor in the queue.
I have going to meet at this moment in time. And I would say this is multitasking on a whole new level.
We might be maxing out our system here, but I think
incoming chat.
Well, I would on the screen, yes, no.
And that's what shows up.
Or you have these yes, no questions. Are those going to be created instantaneously and addressed? Also, the open-ended questions, are those going to be addressed openly at the general meeting part?
These would be, so anyone who has these questions is free to ask them in open chat or open Q&A, but people who would like to provide their feedback in a written format have the option to do so here. So we're not stopping people from doing that, but this is not addressed immediately. This is for records, and then I would report back to you, we have this many people who responded. I would not tell you names, but I would say X number of people felt like this was clear or unclear. X number of people felt like the groundwater management challenges we are facing are this. And then you would say, you would provide additional feedback for the team for the technical memo for the next, for the final plan so that they're able to include all of that feedback in the final plan.
So let's say Jane Public types in, I am concerned about injection wells messing up or dirtying or polluting our aquifers.
Great.
Did they put that in the chat so that it was addressed immediately, or would they type it here? Then if they typed it, it would not be addressed.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think I got the general question.
Okay, well, if they typed it in the chat, it would be addressed immediately. If they typed it in, it would not.
Yes, if they typed it in, it would not be addressed immediately. It would go into the record and it would be brought to the attention of the committee and then the board.
But even if somebody is saying something around those, like live or was in a live thing, the purpose is for us as a committee to receive the comments that these are the challenges people think we're facing. It's not to answer Jane Doe's answer like why it is or isn't a challenge. It's for us
Correct.
to hear that comment and then incorporate that into the plan we ultimately approve, regardless of format. Does that make sense, Sandra? So we're not trying to have an argument with Jane about whether injection wells are good or bad or problem or not problem, any of that. We're just saying this many people said this about these topics and we need to reflect that and address it in the plan, but not in the moment of the workshop.
Thank you.
So other sort of comments on the approach here we're going.
And so another example is you click there to read more and you get to this handout, which was also provided to every person. And you get a little bit, you get a lot of the information that's in the technical memo, but maybe in a more user-friendly format.
Yeah, I find those very nice, very, very nice. Except with the additions that I had mentioned about.
I thought this was a great addition. Thank you for catching that.
This is Matt Carpenter. One comment, and it's along the lines of Sandra's about simplification of the groundwater basin maps and kind of generalizing how groundwater flows primarily from east to west through the valley. I don't think that there's a lot of people that live in the valley that even know that the Santa Clara River flows from east to west, let alone groundwater flow and then the canyons that flow in from the north and the south. I think a map with some arrows on it would go a long way to just get people's minds, on track here. I've seen these maps for years and I know what they mean, but Joe Sixpack needs an extra slide in there to get it. So that's just a comment.
So now I'm going to screen share this. So this is the surface water when we're talking about flow. Do you think we need more than just the main tributaries? You want to see a map there instead of the words, correct?
I think what we call a plan view, which, is right over the top of the valley, that shows that arrows go from the headwaters in the San Gabriel Mountains out, toward Ventura County, and then the canyons that flow in from the north and the south, basically flow into the Santa Clara River where the alluvium is, which kind of correlates to the cross-sectional diagrams that they showed where they called it a bowl, so that people understand how water gets into the bowl. Because otherwise I think that folks are going to be a little bit lost, and it might be something, just one picture that's super simple.
So maybe taking that and doing arrows on it?
Yeah.
Well,
something like that.
This is Kathy Armitage. I was going to say that the figure 5.2, this one, which has kind of the overlay of the alluvium over the Saugus Formation, is a really nice map. I think I don't know if we could incorporate both ideas into the same, but I'd like to see this one on one of the handouts as well.
Yeah, and I think that you could easily animate arrows to get people to understand that, water kind of flows down into the middle and then out to the
Water
west.
flows downhill into the ocean, but sometimes
Not every, yeah.
You need to.
I
it
wonder.
helps to
I wonder if we
that
should.
context.
Yeah, and I wonder if we should do that in the video. I think that might be really useful to show the water flow, because we have, like I said, we haven't done the aquifer video yet. We just in the script. So I think that might be really useful to show that hydrologic flow, like actually animated.
Well,
I
actually,
think,
it would
I
be
think
because it doesn't just go east to west. Some of the water is flowing south, some of the water is flowing north. And if you're in Crowsley Canyon, that water is actually flowing east. And then it makes an abrupt turn north, and then it joins the South Fork, for example.
And I think to expand on that, Sandra, is that it's a dynamic thing. It's kind of always moving. It's not a bowl of water that just sits there. Eventually it does discharge to the west.
Yes.
Right? And that's a complicated thing for the general public to understand. So I would suggest it be in some sort of animated form, as well as on one map that just generalizes that so that folks understand it.
Great.
Don't forget, you're just talking about surface water movement there, and another important area where it's moving is down. It's not just going east to west, it's going down. Mm-hmm. And there are some figures here that have arrows that show that.
Yeah, but I am talking about groundwater, because I get the vertical part of it, but the horizontal part is what makes it a dynamic system, because it's constantly going to the west eventually.
So you're talking about general hydrologic flow.
Yeah, and there might be an opportunity to explain that we have a basin that's going through this exact same plan immediately to the west of us in Ventura County, and the basins downstream of that. And there's a relationship between what we're doing in our basin and those basins, because the water that's generated in our basin in part ends up in those basins. And at some point in the future, that's going to come into the fray. And I think it's important to potentially look at the Santa Clara River Basin as a whole, even though we're concentrating on this, because ultimately that's part of the cumulative picture.
I think maybe your animation, some folks doing video animation, it could be, we're part of this big system, water does that generally. And then within our system, the things that Sandra and Matt are talking about in terms of flow off of canyons, flow underwater, flow vertical, we got, I think your animation folks are going to be brilliant in thinking through how to do that.
Agreed.
Yeah, I worry, Matt, about a still map that isn't, that it's almost like impossible to be as comprehensive as it would need to be. Whereas if I could do it in an animation style, I could really show the down, the in, the start, you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying?
So I get what you're saying, and it will definitely resonate better, but those piezometric groundwater contour maps that were presented previously that showed that in some places in one canyon, the elevation's 1140, and then it goes 1,000 feet to the north and it's 1130. That's indicating the direction of flow. And if you were to draw an arrow through those contour lines, that's usually why we draw those maps, is so that you know what direction water is flowing. And I think that it would go a long way to help simplify for folks that don't do that, day in and day out like I do.
People who can't read, who don't read topos.
Yeah, I'm walking in 3D all the time, so not everybody is.
Well, I don't know if we would need it 3D. A 2D with animation would be fine. That could be a separate animation if you want to do that. But I think just what we're talking about here, the runoff in this particular picture, just showing it as runoff. How does the runoff, where does it come from? And what direction is it ultimately going? You can see how it converges from the north down, from the north south and from the south north. and east to west, how everything comes together in the room. I think that would be a great visual. Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you for your ideas. And this is exactly what this is for.
Sarah, I have a question.
Yep.
Yeah.
What are we calling this workshop? What are we pitching this to the public as? Because I'm worried if we call it the Hydrogeological Conceptual Model Workshop that we're not going to get a lot of people who want to show up for that. So are we giving it like a nice layman's term as the main title and maybe putting that in the subtitle? What's happening with that?
Yeah, so this is what we're doing is calling this a series of workshops that's about groundwater sustainability management. So it's a groundwater sustainability management workshop, and then the subtag is hydrological concept model. So you'll see a series of these, and then the subhead will change. And we're going to be focusing on getting people to want to manage this valuable resource, connect with us on just the importance of groundwater management and sustainability, and less about, this is going to be a bunch of topographical maps and please pay attention. It's a lot more about engaging in the process, and that's what we're going to be focusing on, is really hoping that people engage in the process from day one and then come back to each public workshop, as many as they can.
Tara, if you still, like Kathy just said, come up with this great title, and the subtitle is geologic models. I don't
know if they can see me or not.
But I think that if you titled it something like the geology of our water, something very simple.
Yes. How about surface and groundwater?
How water moves, how water's stored. I think you need to put it in much later. Whichever ones are.
The geology of water, I think.
The geology of water. Those. I think the committee's had really good points there, Tara, for you to take in. I think take out as much of the technical, scientific degree titles as possible.
Or like the geology of our valley and how water moves through it, or something like that.
Good job, Kathy.
Holly, may I build on that? I was thinking about the terminology used in some of these slides too, and I wrote down a list. I want to ask the committee. I wrote down a list of words that I'm not sure should be in the slides. Maybe simpler terms should be used. And the 6 candidates that I have are percolate, alluvium, not alluvial aquifer, that's a name, that's okay to leave there. Evapotranspiration, terrace deposits, stratification, and one says phreatophyte ET.
I reject the last one for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm thinking that might be just sort of out of this conversation that might be useful is for people to be told that as they're reviewing this information, that these are available to them now. That if you have any questions, we have these handouts that are available for you at this website, and feel free to go there. And we actually define alluvium and terrace deposits in a way that we feel like is pretty straightforward. That's part of the
I see that now.
of this. Yeah.
And I appreciate that, but even in that definition, it says crudely stratified, poorly consolidated. Who knows what that means?
Shallow and deep would be a good place to start.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and that's one of the reasons why we gave these to you guys to read ahead of time. Is it is a challenge to get it at a level that's like the right level, because you don't want to go so far low that they can't figure out how to participate in that part of it. So if there are words like that you think we need to pull from the handouts, we're happy to do so, and please let us know.
And yeah, so Tara, we can still have a couple days to review this from our packet and the links that have been sent out, especially now that we have the context of the presentations that are being made, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. But I do need feedback soon so that we can make the changes before the workshop. And I've got to start advertising the workshop next week. So that's another part of.
So anything around advertising, you need to get to Tara by Tuesday. Let's just say, we'll just set a
Tuesday's
date.
good.
Any other comments on the things that are on here? Like if you want to know what poorly consolidated means, by close of business next Friday. Is that too long, Tara? Is that okay?
No, Friday's fine.
Okay, so just want to do some stuff because I certainly know some of the folks like me were very consumed with other things this week. So Tara, what else do you have to show us here?
So there are 4 different handouts. This one is the geology of the Santa Clara River Valley East Subbasin. As you can see, we talk about alluvium terrace deposits in the Saugus Formation, and then we go into what is an aquifer just generally. And that the Santa Clara Valley is served by 2 of them. Then we go into very specifically what are the aquifers and like how do those work. So we talk a lot about the recharge area, the discharge area, and confining beds. We talk about what aquitars are and that it's a natural groundwater filter, what it really does. We then go into the alluvial aquifer again, and because these are the kind of the 2, this is really why we're here. So we re-emphasize them a lot, and we talk a little bit about, instead of what they are geologically, how they supply the basin with water. We then talk about the different tributaries flowing into the different the aquifers locally, and then we have recharge and discharge. So this is about groundwater recharge and discharge, and again, this is about what recharge is, what discharge is, because those are words people don't necessarily know. They think recharge maybe swiping your credit card twice. And then we sort of show the entire.
Very good.
And then we show the different filtration systems and how kind of everything connects within the Santa Clarita Valley. And then we talk about what is overdraft, again, not my bank account. And we talk about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and what that does. And then we talk about the different recharge and discharge sources for each of the different aquifers, at which point Sandra made a very good point, and we will add that in. And then finally, the 4th sort of breakout piece was the surface water, because we felt like that was something that also needed a real discussion, or at least the ability to have an additional conversation about, for people who had questions about the presentation that may not want to ask in front of 1 million people. And with that, we talk very specifically about the Saugus Formation and how that flows, and the hydrological flow of that vertically, not horizontally. And then this is more about the different tributaries and how, what directions they go in order to refill the aquifer. So, and
Yeah,
then
that's
the
an
additional
excellent graphic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We built that from your graphic. We just made it pretty. And then the surface water, the Castaic Lake Lagoon, and then these are the different additional sources of surface water besides just rainfall and the tributaries. So are there any questions on the handouts before I go to the
graphic?
Absolutely.
Holly?
Yes, Dan.
This is Dan. I'm reminded of something, and this will be a point of information, something that Matt mentioned earlier, and it actually went back to the first meeting we had when they were talking about the sub-basin. And the point I'm going to ultimately is the one that Matt made about, you know, our water, some of it ultimately becomes Ventura County's water in the next sub-basin below us. But the point was made at the earlier meeting we had that, you know, our sub-basin is a basin into and unto itself. And that's correct, because actually the Saugus Formation, and the groundwater guys can correct me if I'm wrong, the Saugus actually daylights at a place called Blue Cut near the county line, which helps isolate our basin from the downstream basin, 1. Secondly, I mentioned earlier that 1980 was when imported water started coming into the system. So that means there's more water in the system than has historically been the case. And that provides us the opportunity to use that water over and above what's necessary for environmental purposes and downstream purposes for recycling, groundwater recharge. And then the final point I want to make is that our doing the GSA separate and apart from Ventura County politically is a good thing, because in the sense that we're going to want to maximize the amount of water that we can use and reuse here in the valley. They would like to see as much water come down the river, whether it's natural flows and or additional water that we've paid for and brought into the system, so that they could put it to beneficial use, presumably. But just wanted to kind of point that out to the folks. Enough said. I'm off my soapbox.
No, I think it's a good point, and maybe at least to your last point there, this graphic, could it show something around recycled water?
What's a surface supply?
We do show in this one that it does flow into Ventura, Oxnard, kind of there. And if I add those arrow pieces to show the hydrologic flow, we could do a grayer version, like a lighter color version of their basin that's like faded out, so that you see that there's another basin that we impact, and then do the arrows to kind of show how the water flows in different ways.
Yeah,
what do you guys think about that?
I guess my point is a little bit of a policy point, but is that the more we use water effectively within our basin, both from a sustainability point and management practices, et cetera, that means we're not just putting it down to Ventura, ultimately to the ocean. I mean, again, this is groundwater, that's surface water, but there is that, maybe if there's a way somewhere that we can make that connection, because I do think, I think that will resonate with people, but I'm not sure. Yeah, so you say it there, so maybe there's just ways to bring that out.
Absolutely. It's one of the really important recharge. That's one of the reasons why this little chart is so important, is because this is really how we recharge.
And doing more of that might be a recommended strategy and activity out of the plan. So we certainly—
That is up to you guys.
It ultimately is up to us, but ultimately, I don't want people to be like, oh, we have to serve Ventura. We are serving Santa Cruz Valley Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Okay, my soapbox, I'm done. Other comments?
Holly and Tara, this is Jerry again. Instead of using each sub-basin, and this is for the purposes of the public, if we just said the eastern portion of the Santa Clara River, I think when you say east sub-basin, people, that's the first technical thing people are going to get turned off with. A thought.
Okay. Other last thoughts? And again, we have these links. We're going to have, headline titles by Tuesday and full comments no later than COB Friday.
And then the next thing that I'm going to go over is the scripts that you guys have had. And again, you're free to make additional changes until next Friday. And then we'll be putting together, and any ideas or concepts like the animation, we're happy to include. So with that, I will stop sharing the screen and move on to this other screen. Microsoft Word, share. So this is the Aquifers video script. Were there any changes to the Aquifers video script? It is short, as all of the videos are. To reduce costs, by the way, to make sure that we are doing the maximum effort, minimum bottom line.
So I think, Tara, you should put each script up, give people a for 30 seconds to let people do a quick thing. But I think given the comments we've given so far, like, I mean, aquatards jumped out at me as a word.
Yeah, I got rid of that from the title because it was not, it's not even really a major piece.
So, you know, I think there's always, we can kind of do a quick scan of these again with, you know, the sensitivity to jargon. I think, again, I really ask all of the committee members to, you know, carve out half an hour or sometime in the next week to really look at this stuff with the given context that we have of the technical presentations that we had today. You know, like me reading something in advance, now I look at it a little differently now that I have that context. So that's just me, but I just, I really think that please asking everyone to just make sure you do take out some time to do that. Sandra looks like she's itching to do something, but she got rid of her cat.
I did. So I do want to mention that in this particular instance, the use of the word aquatard is appropriate because you're defining it and explaining that it separates the aquifers.
That's fine. I just jumped out at me. I will defer on that.
That it is appropriate to use that scientific word because it's being explained what it is and why it's important. The other times when we see these words and they're just thrown out there in the middle of a script a script or a description, it's very hard to follow. So this is an educational piece. The other stuff is just stuff that you have to wade through.
Good differentiation.
So just aquifers video script, is there any changes or comments on the aquifers at this moment in time? Otherwise I will move on.
Next.
I hear nothing. And next, screen share, recharge and discharge.
This is good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, anything? Okay, great. This is the best feedback I've gotten all week. All right. And screen share. There is. Geology. This is the one you just watched, so you probably have a little bit more familiarity with it than the other ones.
Okay.
Any changes?
Not hearing any immediately off the cuff.
All right. So, and the last one, which is surface water.
Okay.
Yeah, this is where you may want to also add water. Well, I guess you could think of the, well, they're not reclamation plants, but the treatment facility would be the third paragraph.
Good addition.
Treatment facility. I'm just taking notes. Paragraph. All right. And I will stop sharing there. And those are all 4 scripts. The last thing I wanted to get some feedback on was very specifically the questions that we're asking, because I want to make sure that we're trying to ask like really not like leading questions, just really open-ended to try and get the best possible feedback without leaving people to go, I don't even know what to say. That's the intention. And so I'm going to screen share one more time.
Questions are about water management, not about the geology. Did you want to ask questions on what you presented, or do you want big overview questions?
This is I'm talking about the poll questions online.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, the 3 poll, but the ones beyond that are on groundwater management challenges. Did you just want to be talking about the geology, or did you want to go?
I'm trying to leave that open because I feel like I've asked about geology in the first 2, and then what we're going to be doing is on every page will be the same questions. It will just say, instead of regional geology, it'll say aquifers. Okay. So that way it provides an opportunity for someone to come and provide their feedback once if they just want to go, I feel this about generally, so they don't feel like they have to go, oh, I'm talking specifically about geology. They can say what they really feel, and we're trying to get to this at the end of the day anyways. And then we talk about additional feedback, just about whatever it is.
So maybe you'd want to take those open-ended questions, those 2 questions, consolidate them into one, because they're pretty close and they could be consolidated.
Well, I'm trying to say what are all of them, and then what is the one that you feel is most important?
Yeah, I think you ought to be just more explicit about saying, what do you see as the most important issue we need to be paying attention to, as opposed to examine more closely. It makes it sound like we weren't going to examine it closely.
Well, what are the groundwater management challenges we're currently facing, and what do you think is the most important?
Right.
Or how should they be prioritized, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Something about that.
I'm a little concerned that folks won't be making the connection between what they've learned about geology and what groundwater management is.
Yes.
And how you manage groundwater is a complex leap from what we've learned about geology. And I'm not sure if we've made that connection for someone that might not be as familiar. And I look to this group for
You're correct.
Ideas.
You're correct.
One thing I think you ought to do is one subject per question instead of combining a couple of questions in one question. I think more is better. They don't have to answer all of them, but I think it provides a little bit more. It engages them to think a little bit more about it, or at least each specific question.
Well, if you just listen to the geology report, Dan, not everybody's a water person like you.
Well, that's
okay.
I think
so back to
simplify it.
What management we have, it gets recharged, it gets taken out. We seem to be doing.
So, just to kind of provide some clarity on why there's only 5, why we're really general. Again, I'm trying to not lead anyone in terms of the questions. Like, we're trying to just go, is this geology stuff clear? Do you have any, and really, I just want to know, is this geology stuff clear, and do you have any additional feedback? But instead of asking just those 3 questions,
then you would
right. I'm trying, right.
I think, Tara, I think what we're getting at, your first 2 questions give us as a committee feedback on, are we characterizing things so that our plan is reflective? And, is there something we're missing so that we're doing our base plan? Your second 2 questions, I think, are trying to get at what do you worry about? What do you care about? What do you think about in terms of worrying about our water, specifically our groundwater in the Santa Clarita Valley? I think there's just a little bit of a jump there that, you know, maybe it's one, I think groundwater management challenge is a little bit jargony in the layperson world. And it's maybe it's, you know, that, but I think those questions are designed to solicit that response. So I think we just ought to, in some ways we want to say, you know, what are you I mean, maybe what, you know, what concerns do you have about groundwater here?
Right.
And, you know, what are the things you think we should be most paying attention to or doing? And again, making it much more lay, but I feel like, I think whoever made the point that we made a little bit of a leap there, and it is a little jargony that they may not know that.
Thank you, Holly. That's really useful and helps me understand the disconnect.
Yeah. And I think we need both pieces of those, but I think we can, for us as a committee, but how the user, the audience, the Joe Q public is looking at it is going to be different than what we need and so we need to put it in their terms.
Yeah, when you
absolutely
mentioning groundwater management challenges, it may be better just to phrase it, you know, like, what do you see as the groundwater challenges or groundwater issues that we need to examine more closely? Management almost is too specific and yeah, maybe too specific. That's all.
Yeah, I like Holly's suggestions about what concerns do you have about groundwater. I'd also like to suggest maybe a transition between the poll questions and then say, as we move forward, what concerns do you have about groundwater?
Well said.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for the feedback on the question.
Tara, can you scroll? Okay, hold on. I'm trying to do the two. Do we want to maybe change that second question to, do you now feel you have a better understanding of how our geology relates to our water, to make that connection there?
And maybe a third question, because I really want to know if they have a better understanding. Like, I really want this information.
Yeah. Yeah, or as a third question. Can we give you input? Oh, well, because I don't think the questions came through with the packet. Can you send us the questions?
These questions did not, and yes, I can.
Okay, and
I'll send you this link.
Can we continue to give you feedback with those as well through Friday?
Absolutely, absolutely. Is there any other questions, thoughts, feedback right now? We will also be taking feedback later.
I'll just throw this out there. When I talk to people about groundwater, normal everyday people, not water experts or anybody, they want to know about PFAS. They want to know about VOCs. They want to know about why some of our wells have been shut down. We're not talking about any of that specifically yet, although a little bit of that does come out in the technical memoranda. But I would expect that to come up, if not in this first workshop, then certainly at some point. And that,
absolutely,
that's, you know, if it's not again, it's not what we're focusing on here, but if we're asking these open-ended questions, I would expect that to be one of the key concerns that people would raise. What are we?
Eric, I think you're right. And I think we have to make sure that the way we word it doesn't look like we're not hearing that or aware of that. You know, I don't want to make it sound like we're trying to skirt that in any way, even though it is not the particular focus of this particular workshop.
Why did wells close down because of perchlorate? Yeah. Things like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start going to TikTok here. Apologize, folks. Again, everybody has an assignment, right? They're taking 30 minutes in the next week, providing any final comments, you know, forever hold your peace sort of thing. Those of you that know me well will know I can be kind of a tyrant on that stuff. So I believe, we don't have any public comment. Do we do public comment on this item? And is there any? I'm going to keep working on our part of moving this ahead.
Question is, when are we meeting next?
All right, we got more to do. Hold on, Sandra. Tara, we're going to move on to 3.5. You got a quick schedule for us?
Yeah. And that's, I think I'm going to let Kathy speak to the schedule. Kathy?
Yep.
You there?
Hold on.
There she is.
Turn on everything. Let me open up the schedule. Okay.
This should answer your question, Sandra.
Actually, I have it open on a different laptop. Do you have it handy, Tara, to share?
Yes, I can. Hold up.
Multiple screens going here, and it's not readily available on this one.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting the multiple screen action. Okay.
Good.
Yep, share screen. Share schedule.
Okay. So we have a couple of schedules that we are working with internally. There is a very large Gantt chart that would cover your wall that GSI is working on. It includes a lot of deliverables and technical stuff through all of our subcontractors. And then we have the outreach workshop schedule, which includes not just meetings, but all of the extra stuff that Tara and her team need to do in terms of deadlines to create things and place ads and that stuff. So what we've tried to do here is create a schedule that captures the highlights of both of those things and puts them together that are most relevant to the outreach committee. So what I want to do just really quickly is I've broken it up into cycles. So we have workshop 3 cycle, which is where we are already. We are at line 7 on this document, SAC meeting Friday, May 29th. So you can see our public workshop is scheduled for June 17th. And then we have a SAC debrief on June 24th, which is that 4th Wednesday that we have talked about in the past. And I believe we put a placeholder on your schedule. So all of the yellow lines are meetings. They are the pre-meeting like we're having today, the public workshop, and the post debrief meeting. So those 3 things will always fall about 2 weeks apart. Then the white lines are the before and after, when the draft tech memo will get to SCV water staff for initial comments, when we will give it out to the committee so you have plenty of time to review it. And then at the end, what happens next after all of those comments are compiled and GSI takes that information and creates the final tech memo that will go into the draft plan at the end. So this is just for reference and review. I would say at our next meeting, if you have any questions or comments about any of these dates, we did try to stick to the Wednesday schedule. We weren't able to always stick to the 4th Wednesday like we initially talked about, just because we need these 3 meeting cycles. But they will all take place late in the day like this one, just to be able to accommodate everybody's schedule. And we're hoping having the schedule this far in advance, you'll be able to plug those into your own calendars and save those spaces. But I'm happy to answer any other questions about it.
Any questions on schedule? And
To clarify, we've got a meeting on June 17, which is a Wednesday. It's listed as a Friday. I just want to make sure I'm at the right place at the right time.
Man, do you know how many times I looked down through that day and date column? I can't believe I missed that one. Yes, you're correct.
It is Wednesday.
Yes, because originally today was going to be that date, Friday, but yes, Wednesday, June 17th. Thank you. We'll make that correction.
Kathy, can you send us a schedule? I know we'll probably get meeting requests from Uni.
You will. It was in the extra handouts that were sent out today. It's posted on the GSA website.
I didn't have a chance to look at. In that case, the yellow highlighted dates, are those the dates that the committee members, you would like them in attendance? I guess specifically the workshops are what I'm asking about.
Yes, all of those should have the committee members. The first line, each of those sets of 3, the first line is like what we're doing today, where you'll review the material for the coming workshop. The workshop, you will be in attendance and facilitate, as Tara was talking about, And then the third meeting will be also in the same format we have right now, but we will be debriefing, receiving the report from Tara based on all the input that was offered at the workshop. So yes, we would like your attendance at those meetings each time if possible.
Thanks.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by we're going to help facilitate?
Just like Tara was saying, it won't be a seated meeting of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, but you'll have this advanced knowledge. And you know what? I'm having a hard time figuring out how you translate that to a virtual meeting. Because I'm picturing you all wandering around a room and saying, hey, can I help you? And so Tara.
So how I imagine it to be is, first of all, that you let everyone you've ever known know about the meeting. So please get as many people as you can to come to these meetings, to come to these public workshops, please. That's the first thing that I would love to see happen. Then I know that people text back and forth. I know that that occurs. I know that questions are asked, and sometimes people don't want to ask them and would like to have a question answered that's not necessarily they want to come to us. They want to go to somebody they know and trust and have a question. And at those points, that's the interaction I'm looking to you guys to help guide and just either answer the question if you know the answer, or direct them to somebody who does, or help them engage and remain engaged in the process, rather than just, oh, I don't know the answer, I don't know who to talk to, and now I'm just going to wander off into the night. I hope that was helpful.
I think though also as we talk through, I mean, so we have the pre-work to do, but I think also as we think about this for a virtual meeting and it come closer to it, here's things we can be doing, you know, kind of maybe map that out for the committee and send out, give us our task list of things to do before, during, etc.
Okay, well, I would like to mention, if you would like me to publicize this, I'm going to have some information or something for people to respond to within a few days. Just an announcement of the meeting and how to sign up for it.
Right, so remember your comments to Tara on titles and key things like that, so she can finish the flyers and the announcements are due by Tuesday, so that she can get that stuff out, including out to everybody by a day or so after that.
Good, because you know that way I could send it out with my with my alert to my organization.
Which would be, that is exactly the kind of thing I'm hoping for. So everyone will be sent that save the date. There will not be a requirement to RSVP or sign up. It's a public workshop, so you can come in and then you sign in when you, like, I record the people who have attended.
Yes,
so it's not
meeting, so you're going to have a link, so somebody is going to have
correct.
To get in.
The link, all the information will be on that handout, but they won't need to like sign up ahead of time and like register or anything like that.
Okay. All right, any other comments? And just do the check Tara public comment on the schedule.
Yeah. Are there any public comments? I'm not muted this time, so that's exciting.
Okay, folks. I am hitting my hard stop. We do have a item on a request for future agenda item. Is it possible to table that till our next meeting, or do we need to address that today?
Can I just say, are you talking about the permit?
Yeah,
Yes, we're talking about agenda item 4.
I'll take 1 minute just to.
Okay.
So am I on? This is Roger. Okay.
Yes.
The permit was part of your agenda handout. It's a permit to divert and store water by Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I'd like to make at the next meeting, maybe if with your permission, Holly, about a 10-minute presentation on the background on this. And you could have as much discussion or not. I think it's important to the groundwater basin. And Jeff, if you could help focus and make this a shorter discussion, if you can provide the actual amount of water that has been diverted and stored since 2005 already. That's a matter of public record. You can get it from Department of Water Power or they're supposed to provide the amount every year to United Water Conservation District. You can get it from there, rather than for me to estimate how much water they've been diverting and storing already since 2005. If you can get that for me, it'll help focus. And that's it.
Yeah, I'll pull it together for you.
So,
Thank you.
Roger,
Maybe you can
question
email
is,
it to me from Tara.
is there a specific timetable associated with this, or is this background for our ultimate plan?
Ultimately, the State Water Resources is supposed to make a decision on this application. They had hoped to make it by June 30th, which obviously that's going to slip because of COVID. They don't have a set date, but they would like to act on the permit either for or against. There's no further protests allowed. There have been 3 protests, but it would hopefully the groundwater board will take a position, whether it's a position to support the permit application or against. I don't know. Everybody has their own bias, but I think it ought to be a matter of discussion and some action recommendation to the board so that they can send a letter to State Water Resources.
So Tara and the other staff on, maybe what I would ask is for you to find out what the permit schedule is.
I'll work with that, yeah.
Yeah,
Tara.
which is known, but you're right, everything's sliding. And figure out where this can fit into a future meeting. It may not be the next meeting, since our next meeting is, you know, these stakeholder things. And so we can just, but make sure we schedule it at a meeting that fits with that broader schedule.
Okay.
So that, just because I also don't want to interrupt the stakeholder schedule, but I think if we give them just those couple pieces of Legos to put together, they can find a time to put that on the agenda in accordance with the state schedule.
I appreciate that, and I'll work with Tara on that.
Wonderful, thank you. With that, Tara, Kathy, are there any further things things we need to discuss?
I don't think so.
All right, well, thank you all. Thank you for staying late. We will, you know, we'll keep getting better at this, and have a great weekend. Stay safe, and thank you all for your time and your participation.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience
everybody.
with
Thank you,
the
Holly.
mute. I appreciate it a lot.